Now you have some time to look at the questions.
Have you got the results from the survey we did about the changes that have been made to Ashtown in the last 25 years, Bill?
Yes, Jane, and there've been a lot of changes. Some of them people are happy about, and some of them they aren't.
What, for example?
Well, for example, the bus system used to be much better, and even though the old uncomfortable buses have been replaced with new stylish ones, fewer people use them.
Why is that?
A lot of people think it's because fares are higher, but that isn't true. In fact, the cost compared to average salaries is pretty much the same as 25 years ago. The fact is that the buses now just go to the most popular destinations, and as the city centre no longer allows vehicles, there are even fewer places where buses can go.
Most people must be happy with fewer cars in the town centre, though.
I'm not so sure. 5 years ago, a bypass was supposed to be built so that people could easily get from one side of the town to the other without going into the centre, but those plans still haven't happened. The biggest success, in my opinion, is the building of areas for cyclists. Far more people are travelling by bike and using the facilities than anybody could have imagined.
That's all very interesting, but how have the jobs that people do in the city changed? That's sure to have had an impact on what the town looks like.
You're not wrong there. The town used to be a lot more polluted due to all of the products that were made in factories here. Manufacturing is still important, of course, and services such as accountancy firms and website developers employ a lot of people in the town, but you only have to see the number of universities and colleges that have opened in the town in the last 25 years to see that is where most of the jobs are now.
OK, now shall we have a look at how some of the buildings have changed?
I think that, first of all, we should look at how the railway station has changed. As there are now fewer buses, more people drive to the railway station to take a train. 25 years ago, the car park was much smaller, and although it might not look very modern, most of the spaces have only been there for 5 years.
Oh, yes. Didn't the cinema used to be quite near the railway station? I suppose they built more spaces when they knocked it down.
That's right. The Grand Cinema used to be next to the railway station, but they rebuilt one exactly the same as the old one over in King Street.
What about the indoor market? My mum says there used to be an outdoor one, but that closed down a long time ago.
Yes, and when the outdoor market closed down, the indoor market became a lot more popular. 10 years ago, it looked like it would close down too, as the building was really old and it had become dangerous. It used to be owned by the council, but a private business bought it and made the changes so that it could stay open.
It's good to see it's so popular still, despite all the new supermarkets in town. I bet the library isn't as popular as it used to be, though.
You'd be surprised. A lot of people still use the library. Most people think that people are less keen on borrowing books than in the past, but the library has adapted to changes. It's true that fewer people go in there to borrow books, but since they made tablets and computers available, more people have started visiting it. It has really fast Wi-Fi too, so people like it because of that.
Quite a few of the factories have closed down or been sold in the last 25 years, though. So what happened to all the buildings that used to house them? I suppose they're all shut down now?
Some of them have been demolished and some have been converted for other uses, but that isn't surprising. The thing that I found surprising was that although education has become more important to the economy of the town, there isn't an art college anymore. In fact, the art college is now used as a doctor's surgery.
Oh, really? Anyway, I think we need to look at how we're going to present these findings to...
Now you have some time to look at the questions.
Despite the benefits of fracking, which its supporters claim, there are clearly various concerns connected with it. Some of these are real, but it's possible that they're not as well-founded as opponents of fracking would have us believe. So, what exactly are these concerns? Well, we can divide them into 3 categories: environmental concerns, health concerns, and economic concerns. To begin with, let's look at the environmental concerns. The first and possibly most significant environmental concern is that despite producing lower levels of carbon dioxide, shale gas is still a cause of global warming, and so it should not be used. In effect, it simply stops energy producers and governments focusing on the real need to develop renewable sources of energy. What's more, it's likely that although countries which produce shale gas will use less coal and oil, the use of coal and oil will still continue to increase in other places, so globally there will be little or no benefit to the environment. Another environmental concern is pollution. If the production site is badly maintained, dangerous chemicals can get into water sources and rivers. While there's some evidence of this happening at existing production sites, it isn't clear whether this problem happens everywhere, so more research is needed. The last environmental concern connected with drilling is that of earthquakes. We're more familiar with earthquakes happening in certain areas of the world, like Japan and China, but there's evidence that drilling can disturb the ground in the local area, causing it to move and shake, which in turn damages buildings. Usually these movements aren't serious, but they can cause a lot of worry to the local population, so they need to be considered. In fact, very few of these ground movements have definitely been caused by drilling, and it might be that people are worried because of what they hear or read in the media, rather than the actual reality of the situation. Now I'd like to turn to the economic concerns. Opponents of fracking say that the economic benefits are not as great as its supporters claim. While there's clearly an increase in economic activity in the areas where fracking is carried out, as I discussed earlier, there are often negative effects on agriculture and farming in these areas. And there's good evidence that house prices fall because people aren't willing to move into areas where fracking is taking place or has taken place. Another economic concern is that gas production can be very high at the beginning of the fracking process, but it can drop quickly, down to as little as 10% in 5 years. This can result in more drilling and greater use of water, which increases the cost of getting the gas out of the ground. The other main economic problem is that the estimated amount of gas in the ground may not be anywhere near as high as fracking supporters claim, so investing huge amounts of money in new wells may not benefit the economy at all. This brings me to the last major concern: health. Fracking can bring with it a pollution problem. If the well isn't deep enough, less than 600 meters, or if there are problems with drilling, the chemicals can leak into the drinking water supply and cause problems for the local population. There have even been reports of residents opening their water taps and seeing brown water and mud coming out. Pollution can also be carried in the air to local towns and affect people with existing medical problems, especially those with breathing difficulties. There have even been reports of more cases of cancer among people living near production sites, as well as among the workers themselves. Clearly, a lot more research needs to be done on the effects of fracking on health. So to summarize, there are significant environmental, economic, and health concerns connected with fracking. But we need to carry out a lot more research to see whether these concerns are real. Whether they're real or not, they're having an effect on the fracking industry right now. In many places around the world, local people have protested angrily when they found out that fracking is planned in their area. These concerns have also led local, regional, and national governments to announce that fracking won't start until they're quite sure that it's safe. This means that they'll prevent any activity connected with fracking until there's enough evidence to assure its safety, especially in areas with higher populations. In fact, in France, they've decided not to allow fracking anywhere in the country. We can see that the future is very uncertain, and that is what I'd now like to discuss.
Now you have some time to look at the questions.
While fracking is being used around the world, we've seen that there are serious concerns about it. What's clear is that fracking isn't the answer to the growing worldwide need for energy as countries increase their consumption. Already, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has reached 400 parts per million. This may not seem very high, but we have to remember that 200 years ago, the level was around 280 parts per million, so it's increased by over a third since then. As a result, it's estimated that global temperatures have already increased by almost 1 degree Celsius. This increase changes the climate and affects the weather in many parts of the world. Many places, such as Northwest Europe, are expected to become warmer and wetter, and we've seen winter storms becoming worse in this region. Other places, such as sub-Saharan Africa, are expected to become hotter and drier, with deserts growing in area and seriously affecting farmland. Ice in the polar regions will melt and sea levels will rise, which will put coastal cities in greater danger of flooding. Clearly, we need to reduce and eventually stop using non-renewable resources like coal, oil, and gas. It may well be true that fracking can slow down global warming for a while and allow us to develop better renewable resources. However, these resources, like wind, wave, and solar power, are currently far more expensive to develop than shale gas production. On top of that, they take a long time to develop and start paying for themselves. Consumers have to pay higher bills to help the development of cleaner sources, and energy companies don't want to lose customers by asking them to pay more. Consequently, it's important for international organizations like the United Nations and national governments to support the development of renewable resources. The problem here, of course, is that governments usually think of short-term answers to energy problems and not longer-term ones. They're afraid that if they reduce the production and use of gas and oil, their economies will do worse than other economies, so they don't want to take action to increase the use of renewable sources. As I mentioned earlier, there are many people in different countries like Canada, the UK, and France who don't support fracking, especially if it's going to take place near where they live. Environmental groups also oppose fracking, not just because they want to protect people living in areas where fracking is planned, but also because they see fracking as part of the old way of doing things, like burning coal, oil, and gas, and increasing global warming. They want to see continued action and are trying to persuade governments to develop wind, wave, and solar power, as well as other renewable forms of energy, to fight global warming and ensure the supply of energy in the future. Certainly, coal, oil, and gas will run out one day, And if we haven't developed other forms of renewable energy, we'll then have serious problems with supplying energy to the growing world population, and the problems of fracking will seem relatively unimportant.